Well, hot damn, HBO. That's how it's done. It's such a weird coincidence that for the last couple months, we've had episodes dropping at around the same time for two shows that are so similar and yet so different. On the surface, The Penguin and Agatha All Along seem to have a lot in common, both based on comic book properties, both spin-off shows that no one seemed to be asking for, starring B-list characters, or D-list in Agatha's case, whose only justification for getting their own vehicles were that they happened to grab people's attention as villains in more high-profile projects starring more popular characters. But that's about where the similarities end, sort of. Because while Agatha All Along ended up being one of the cringier, most obnoxious, awkward, and worst-written things I've seen in 2024, The Penguin is probably one of the best shows of the entire year. I'm not saying it's the best, but damned if it isn't up there. The Penguin dropped its finale episode a few days ago as I'm recording this, and ever since then I've been thinking, these shows had so much in common. How is it that one of them could excel at every level while the other just kind of embarrassed itself? And the reason it took me so long to make this video is because for a while I couldn't figure that out, which is weird because ultimately the answer is very simple. It's one I come back to over and over again on this channel. The writing. And it's just the tip of the iceberg, but it starts with the writing of the main characters. The Penguin and Agatha Harkness are both villains, but the difference is one show understands that and the other doesn't. I went over this several times when I was reviewing Agatha. One of the biggest problems constantly dragging that show down was the writer's complete unwillingness to accept the fact that their lead character was the bad guy. She's an unrepentant murderer, she uses people, lies to them, manipulates them, and shows no remorse whatsoever if they die in the process because as long as she gets what she wants, it's all good. The one and only sympathetic trait she had is that she loved her son. Take that away and she's a self-serving, narcissistic monster. And all that would be fine if the writers understood the assignment. But for reasons I still don't understand, they kept trying to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted Agatha to be the dastardly, devilish rogue, but they also wanted her to be the series' protagonist and thus a good guy. Which meant that from the very beginning you had these two completely opposing impulses bumping up against each other, making the whole thing super awkward due to the writer's complete inability to pick a f***ing lane. They wanted Agatha to be the unlikely hero of her own story, so they kept trying to hand-wave away all the despicable things she did so she could get this quasi-redemption at the end that the character didn't earn in any way, and narratively, that just doesn't work. The whole thing was so ass-backwards that the actual big bad of the show, Lady Freaking Death, felt more sympathetic than Agatha did. By the end of the series, I was rooting for the villain because the person the writers kept insisting was the hero was so much more hateable, which they refused to acknowledge, and that just made me want to see her lose because I resented her so much as a character at that point. Now contrast this with the Penguin. All those despicable things that Agatha did, Oz Cobb also does. He lies, he manipulates, he murders people in brutal fashion, by the way. Hell, you could argue that he did even worse things than Agatha did, and I wouldn't disagree with that. But the reason he gets away with it, weirdly enough, is because he's not supposed to. Oz Cobb isn't supposed to be redeemed, and he's not looking for redemption. The show doesn't try to force you to like him because he's the bad guy. He's everything that Agatha Harkness should have been. And sure, he has humanizing qualities, absolutely. He loves his mom, he's loyal to people who are loyal to him, but at the end of the day, Oz Cobb is a monster, and they never gloss that over. The end result being that this character feels genuine in ways that Agatha just doesn't. Every time in this show, when Oz would make you think he's got a little bit of humanity, a little bit of decency in him, it's usually quickly followed by him doing something so horrible it's kind of jarring. And yes, you could say that about Agatha as well, but it hits much differently with her because those writers wanted the audience to like Agatha despite the awful things she did. And that extended to her supporting cast too. Like this Jennifer Kale character, in her introduction scene, we find out that she was responsible for hideously burning no less than 800 innocent people. Never shows any remorse for this, and her whole storyline is about her trying to get her magic powers back so she can escape accountability for it. And she's another character who is not presented as a villain, even though she sure sounds like a villain to me. Her horrible crimes are basically forgotten about. We're supposed to root for her to get what she wants, just and it ends with another payoff/redemption that is completely disingenuous and unearned. And it's like that with most of the cast, really. To be honest, most of these characters are pretty awful. They're either unapologetic assholes, shoehorned into roles they don't belong in, or pointless red shirts who barely affect the plot and are only there to fill time until it's their turn to feed the meat grinder. The one exception in the whole thing, well, one of two exceptions, was Wiccan. He was the character you could kind of sympathize with. Not that the writers did a good job with that either. And the only person, one, we were meant to like, and two, who wasn't a detestable piece of shit by the end of the show. Frankly, the series should have been about him from the start, because he's the only character who actually made sense in that role. And the other exception, surprisingly, was Lady Death. Not that we were supposed to like her, we weren't, but we did only because Agatha was so horrible and narcissistic that she made Death seem like the good guy by comparison. So her being likable was kind of an accident. How deluded does a writer have to be to miss the mark that badly? Now look at what the Penguin did. It's fair to say that every character in that show is a bad person, except maybe Vic. He does have some semblance of a moral compass, but those morals get a lot more flexible as time goes on. The point is, The Penguin is a show with no heroes. It makes no bones about that. But just because there are no heroes doesn't mean there's no one to root for. That's the genius of it. As evil as these characters can be, I found myself rooting for all of them at one point or another. Because the show doesn't demand that we like them, we're only meant to understand them. And they're all given sympathetic moments, way more than the Agatha characters get, but those things are never used to gloss over the bad stuff they do. It's all just part of the package. In the finale episode, there's a scene with Oz and his mom where I felt so bad for Oz, I kind of wanted to give him a hug. The very next scene is him doing something so vile and so despicable, my jaw was on the floor. And if you hated him for doing this, fine, good, you're supposed to. That's the whole point. That's who this character is. That's the story. All the writers are asking is that you come along for the ride. And the ironic thing is that you probably end up liking Oz regardless because he's just such a fascinating guy. Evil, yes, but fascinating. And it's the same way with all the Penguin characters. Hell, spoilers, Sophia Falcone murders her entire family, and I was cheering her on while she did it, because I totally understood how she was driven to this, and god damn, did the writers work their asses off to earn that moment. And Sophia even showed her humanity in doing this too by sparing her little cousin, who was the only one who was innocent in that whole mess, as opposed to Agatha, who made her own son an accomplice on her murder spree. Sophia's darkest moment had more humanity than Agatha's best. Think about that for a minute, and then ask yourself again why the Penguin characters are so much better. The parallels are really bonkers if you think about it. In both cases, you've got a female character murdering many people, but Agatha spends centuries killing every witch she comes across, and her motivation is barely there. She's doing this just to gain more power, apparently. Power that she already has plenty of, by the way, so that doesn't even make sense. As motivation, it's incredibly selfish and self-serving, and worst of all from a writing standpoint, shallow. So then, when the show treats Agatha as if we're supposed to like her despite all that, it feels like bullshit because they made her out to be a one-dimensionally evil person almost from the jump. The only thing that ever humanized her was her son, but she kept doing this long after he was gone, and we still don't really know why unless it was always just as simple as her being power-hungry because the plot says so. Whereas when Sophia Falcone kills her family, not only does she keep the audience's sympathies, but in a sick, twisted way, she feels almost justified in doing this because of how these people wronged her and because the story was so well developed. The Penguin writers give reasons and context and clear motivations for their characters to do the evil things they do. So even though they don't ask you to like these people, they seem very likable anyway because you understand how they came to be the way they are. And unlike the Agatha writers, they don't shy away from the consequences of those things either. Yes, Sophia is a ruthless murderer, but she's also a victim who was driven to insanity because her own family betrayed her. Yes, Oz Cobb is an evil bastard, but he did those horrible things in large part due to this desperate need to make his mom proud of him. After watching this show, I know why Oz is that way now, and the writers never tried to make him anything other than the villain he is. I still don't know basic details like that about Agatha. Why is she so power hungry? I have no idea. The character work on Agatha all along is child's play compared to the Penguin. In fact, if I'm Kevin Feige, I'm getting on the phone with Lauren LaFranc, the Penguin showrunner, and I'm gonna try to work out some kind of deal to bring her to Marvel Studios. LaFranc is exactly the kind of creator the MCU needs right now, because she's really good with characters, and maybe more importantly, she's really good with female characters. LaFranc did with Sophia Falcone in one episode what Jack Schaefer and her team of slack-jawed fart sniffers couldn't do with Agatha Harkness in 9. 18 if we're counting WandaVision. She made me care. After 2 seasons across 2 different shows, I still barely know anything about Agatha. But episode 4 of The Penguin was one of the best character studies I've seen on any show in a long time. In 57 minutes, Sophia goes from naive, innocent victim to ruthless mob boss and cold-blooded killer, and it all works. It was so effective that Sophia Falcone is easily one of the big breakout characters of the year, and will most likely win Kristen Milioti a fucking Emmy. And if LaFranc could do that for Sophia Falcone, just imagine how she could rehabilitate characters like Carol Danvers or Kamala Khan, or Agatha Harkness for that matter. She could actually make them worth watching maybe. Hell, I'd trust her more than I would Jack Schaefer at this point. That same depth of character extends to all the leads on the Penguin, by the way. Oz does absolutely despicable things, but at the same time, because of how well they develop him, you can't help but feel sorry for the guy, even when you know you really shouldn't. And every time they lure you in like that, every time they get you to feel for Oz because of the stuff with his mom or Vic, or when people mock him with that Penguin nickname or whatever, every time they elicit a little bit of genuine sympathy for him, they're just setting you up for that final gut punch when they drive home the point that Oz is the bad guy. Ultimately, The Penguin is a show about villains, and Oz Cobb is the biggest one. The writers aren't trying to have it both ways. Oz isn't the hero of his own story, and they don't try to make him one. This story is a dark, up tragedy of Oz's own making, and that's why it works so well. And you might not be on Oz's side. That's fine. You don't have to be. Maybe you'd like to see him get what he wants, and maybe you don't. But once he's got it, he can't even take any joy in it because of what he had to do to get it and the consequences for all those things. It's weirdly poetic that way. See, this is the kind of stuff the Agatha writers never understood. They wanted Agatha to be both a villain and a hero. They wanted her to be redeemed without doing any of the work it would take to get there. Not surprising, since at least half of the characters in that show were blank slates. Even the ones who were lucky enough to get fleshed out weren't treated well. Jennifer Kale's entire storyline was told to us through exposition, same thing with Alice. Lilia's arc turned out to be realizing that she needed a coven when nothing in the previous episode supported that. The character work in general was completely phoned in. It was so bad and so awkward that the ultimate villain of the show ended up looking like more of a hero than the title character. And lest we forget, it wasn't all down to the characters either. The Penguin told a hell of a story too. A story about warring mob factions, about a man who was looked down on his entire life, determined to rise up through the ranks of Gotham's criminal underworld and seize power no matter what the cost to himself or the people around him. About a woman who became a monster because she was betrayed by everyone she loved and trusted, and now wants to lash out and punish the people who ruined her life. The story is very rich and has so much more going on than you might think. And on the other side of the coin, there's Agatha. And if you watch that show carefully, you'd be surprised how much wasted time there is, how little story there actually is, how many scenes are spent with people just walking around talking about stuff that doesn't even matter while they wait for the plot to happen. Multiple subplots that are inconsequential and go basically nowhere. Characters whose storylines are completely pointless and only exist to fill time. That's why the pacing was always so bad. No joke. If you cut every unnecessary plot and character and wasted moment out of Agatha all along and just stuck to the important stuff, you could probably shave a good 2 or 3 episodes off that thing. There is so much wasted time in that show. I don't know why the hell they thought they needed 9 episodes. Maybe it was a studio mandate or something, but they obviously never had enough story to drag it out that long. Whereas The Penguin had great pacing and a story that deserved its episode order because it had a lot of story to tell. And I could keep going on about it all day, but the bottom line is this. The Penguin works because it's a smart show that knows exactly what it is. The origin of a villain. And Agatha all along fails, 1, because it's run by much dumber, less talented people, and 2, because it had no idea what it was supposed to be, and instead of trying to figure that out, it just wasted the audience's time with poor storytelling about a bunch of cringy, wacky, magical crap, even worse character work, and then tried to shoehorn in a bullshit redemption for a villain who didn't deserve to be redeemed because she'd done nothing to earn it. I had no interest in watching The Penguin at first. I only checked it out after I heard all the buzz about it. I thought it was just gonna be some generic crime show piggybacking off the Batman IP, and I couldn't have been more wrong. Even if it were just a crime show, it would still be great television, but it really gets these characters, it respects the Batman lore, and tells a damn good story within that universe that is just super compelling to watch. And not only did it completely leave Agatha all along in the dust in terms of quality, but it also made those idiots over at Sony who have been stumbling around in the dark without a flashlight as they try to exploit the Spider-Man Rogues Gallery look like absolute jackasses. This is how it's done, Sony and Marvel. This is your blueprint right here. So what's the excuse gonna be the next time Sony craps the bed with a movie about some B-lister Spider-Man villain with Spider-Man nowhere in sight? Or the next time Marvel makes a movie or a show where they try to make some cringy, loathsome, thinly drawn female character out to be the bestest ever? HBO just showed that it's possible to do this shit well if you've got the right talent in place, and we shouldn't have to wait for the next Matt Reeves Batman project to get another dose of that. So, seems like you guys have got some work to do. Thanks so much for watching. While you're here, ding that bell icon and follow my social media so you can always be notified when I upload new stuff. FYI, the notifications are notoriously shoddy these days, so following my Twitter is the best way to make sure you never miss a video. Link is right down there. Most importantly, don't forget to do all the other YouTube things. Hit that like button, leave a comment, share the video, subscribe if you haven't already, make sure you're still subscribed, and I'll be back with more real soon. Take care, stay tuned, I'll see you next time.